Joining us today, I am Sita Katie. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Palm Health, and today we have Doctors Varsha Rathod. She's our internal medicine, functional medicine, and rheumatologist specialist. And if Varsha can say hello to everyone.
Hi, everybody.
And then we have Scott Jameson. He has a specialty in internal medicine and functional medicine. And Scott, if you can say hello.
Good afternoon.
And Bashima Williams is a family medicine practitioner and specialty in functional medicine. Thank you for joining us, Bashima.
Hi, everyone.
Great. So as we start with our webinar, we really wanted to see how digestion is one of the pillars of our health system. And when we look at digestion and our digestive health, we know that that is one of our foundations to health and well-being. So to start our new webinar series, we thought this would be fruitful to speak about leaky gut, our immune system, our digestive health, and how are they all interrelated. What we know from the foundation of functional medicine, and all of our primary care physicians at Palm Health are trained and specialized in functional medicine, where they've received their training from the Institute of Functional Medicine. And the Institute of Functional Medicine has really laid a nice foundation in how we can approach health, and not just a disease, medicine oriented, prescription oriented basis of treating individuals, but to really look at that foundation of what are the root causes and links to causing dysfunction in somebody's normal state. And so I really like to acknowledge the Institute of Functional Medicine for, one, providing us the education and the specialists that we have set forth, but also to just help us understand how we can look at health in a different way. So we're going to jump right in today, and I'm going to have Varsha take us off with really starting to lay that foundation of how the gut and immune system are intimately and related. So I'd like Varsha to speak, and we are going to toggle between some slides today. So please forgive me as we're learning this new platform. I will try to be as smooth as possible with toggling between being able to see the presenter speak as well as the slides. So Varsha, will you go ahead and take us off?
Yeah, sure. So the question is how the gut and the immune system are interrelated. So first, I want for you to, like Dr. Kadia was telling us, is that the gut is just one of 5 core biological systems or pillars, if you will, in functional medicine. And the immune system is one such pillar, right? And yet here we're talking about the gut and the immune system. And this is because the digestive system has the immune system within it. I actually like to think of the immune system as being a billionaire family. They're a billionaire family because they not only have real estate in every organ of the body, but they also have the ability to spend their money and go on a leisurely vacation to do surveillance work in different organs. That's what I call it, surveillance equals vacation, or they go to war with and having disputes with their neighbors, right? So the immune system and the gut are very interrelated. And Sita, if you'll show me this next slide on Digin. In functional medicine, we use this mnemonic called Digin, D-I-G-I-N, to look at all the core functions of the gut. So I want for you to go and see that the immune system, the 4th is immune modulation and inflammation, being very much part of the gut. So not only is the immune system part of the gut, but it's also physically located in the gut in a very special location on the contra side of the lumen of the gut. So in the lumen is where food and bacteria are present. And then on the other side where your nervous system, your immune system, your blood supply and lymphatics are located, it's actually multidimensional. It's not just a layered way of thinking about it, but it's really a multidimensional form. And that's where the immune system is located. If that was not complicated enough, the gut microbiome, the bacteria in the gut that Dr. Bashima Williams will talk to us about, also very closely regulate the development and the function of the innate and the adaptive immune system. What that means in simple language is when the gut bacteria are happy and put out happy metabolites, they actually talk to your T cells and down modulated to cause something called Tregs, which bring balance in the body. Whereas if they're ticked off or there's an infection or COVID happening, then they're going to start releasing some substances which get some cells to go from Treg to Th17. These are very inflammatory cells. So sitting right there is the microbiome connecting with the immune system, and the immune system, the entire innate immune system, as well as the adaptive immune system, that is that gets trained as you initially see the bacteria, are very part of the digestive system. I hope that helps you slowly understand it. And another way of thinking about it is I like to think about the immune and the nervous system together, because you cannot really separate these. And one simple way is to look at an organism, say like an earthworm. An earthworm is a eukaryote, a multicellular being whose entire brain immune system is in its gut, right? The gut operates everything. But as we started to evolve, then we started to have real estate for the immune system. The immune system had the thymus, the lymph nodes, and there are little areas in the body that the immune system could populate, and actually in every organ. And as the human embryo was forming, the foregut, the part of the gut which controlled a whole lot in the early embryonic stages, goes on towards the region of the head called cranially, and becomes the brain. So everything every nervous system part in the gut is also located in the brain, and every immune system in the gut is also located in the brain. So similarly, there are connections with multiple organs. I hope this will help you understand how complex it is, but truly that the immune system is heavily located in the gut. And I don't have scientific evidence for it, but it's felt that about 60% of actual cells of the immune system are located in the gut.
Thank you, Varsha. I think that's a really nice background. And I do think that this is a very complicated topic, and I hope that we can really distill it down over the course of the next hour to really help individuals understand how there is this interconnectedness between the digestive system, the immune system, and the nervous system, and why it is the center of what we do when we're taking care of patients with a functional medicine approach. And I think that it is, the surface that absorbs all the nutrients that we bring in and then assimilate to make energy in our body and to make us be who we are. So of course it's going to be the foundation of how we live. So I think that's a really nice background, and we'll get more into the details of it. And although this is a technical topic, we are going to try to keep it non-technical. So I really thank you, Varsha, for giving us that background and getting us started. So I'm going to keep this Digin up here, because what we're going to really focus on is this intestinal permeability. That's leaky gut, in another word. So why is that intestine barrier leaky to certain things? And so let's really understand what leaky gut is. And so Scott, would you mind giving us some background on what is a normal healthy barrier and how does it become leaky?
So this is a schematic that shows what a healthy intestinal barrier looks like. In the upper part of the slide, the light blue would be the lumen of the intestine. So that's where food, water, things that come into the body from outside journey down through the GI tract. And then the middle darker blue slides are that intestinal barrier, and that's made up of these columnar cells that are tightly bound together, the little white line going vertical. And then it has those little villi that are very important. We'll come back to that. But that basically, it's an amazing biophysical capacity. By making those microvilli, you can expand the absorptive capacity of those cells double, triple, and higher. And so those villi are really where a lot of the digestion, absorption, occurs, and unfortunately that also makes them targets for inflammation and other problems. Below that line of cells is the what would be the body, where the immune system, where the blood. So that columnar cells really do form the barrier that separates us from our internal system with that very important mix of food and fluids coming down through the GI tract. And these cells are really the trafficking centers that selectively absorb what we need with the beneficial components, and in a healthy situation, keep us from absorbing those things that are either toxic or potentially toxic to our bodies. As we move to the next slide, you'll see what happens in what we call leaky gut, or a breakdown in this intestinal barrier. And again, if we start at the top in the intestinal lumen, things such as toxins, high sugar foods, bacteria, viruses, as they get into that area, they basically attack and cause an inflammatory reaction. And you'll see that those nice areas of villi that were so smooth, they begin to break down and flatten out. And as we do that in response to these toxins or inflammation, again, as we said about the importance of that absorption capacity, by expanding those areas, we actually lose a lot of that expansion. So even at that point, we're not absorbing the nutrients and minerals that we need. And then in addition, those nice white lines that were on the previous slide is good, what we call tight junctions. As they break down, it really opens almost an open conduit for things that would never, in a healthy state, get across that barrier, become absorbed or get through and into the bloodstream. And then as Varsha was saying, that those things then, because the immune system, the nervous system is on that other barrier, other side of the barrier, they then are seeing things that they should not see. They are seeing antigens, food products, bacterial byproducts that are toxic, and begin to work on stimulating this whole systemic cascade of inflammation. And so that's kind of a basic pictorial of what, when we talk about leaky gut, this is kind of what we're envisioning, and the model that we're working on in terms of understanding what's happening, and also importantly, how do we then begin to move forward into targeted therapies.
Thank you, Scott. That's really helpful. And so as we understand what is happening biologically, I think it's helpful to then turn to really see what actually is happening in our bodies. What are those symptoms that happen once we get that leaky gut? How does that manifest? So Pashima, would you mind giving us a constellation of what those symptoms look like once our intestinal barriers become leaky? What do we see in ourselves?
Sure. When I see patients in my office, so just practically speaking, patients come in with a whole constellation of symptoms. A lot of times we do focus on a gut, and sometimes it's a little confusing to our patients as to why, and I'll explain that. There are direct and indirect gut issues. So a lot of people come in wanting their gut fixed. It's because they have complaints like bloating or nausea, constipation, diarrhea, loose stools, multiple food sensitivities, things like that. But there are also indirect consequences, like, for example, with your skin, you're losing your hair, you have acne, you have eczema. Neurologically, you can have depression, anxiety, restless leg syndrome at night, ADD or ADHD, brain fog, fatigue, both physically and mentally. You can have gynecological problems like painful periods, heavy periods, ovarian cysts, infertility issues. You can have endocrine problems like thyroid disease, weight gain, weight loss, bone density issues. In fact, a large number of osteoporosis, especially when found early, is due to leaky gut. Autoimmune diseases that we deal with all the time, like rheumatoid, for example. So it's important for us to fix the gut. And I always say, let's heal the gut first, and then we push a restart button and try to fix whatever, not fix, but help with whatever else is going on. But until you fix the leaky gut, not only directly, but also indirect consequences and symptoms will happen.
Great, that's really helpful. And I think that's what's fascinating is it's not just digestive symptoms. It's not just bloating or constipation or diarrhea. You're getting effects of the entire body just from your leaky gut. And I think that's what we want to impress is it's not just one symptom, and it's really a constellation of symptoms that usually present.
Yeah. In fact, Sita, I want to just tell you that I had a a couple patients this week. One of them, before I started discussing, I had seen her about 6 weeks ago, and all we did was worked on the gut. And she said, "Doctor, before we go on, can I just tell you, my fatigue is gone, both mentally and my brain is working better. My hair is growing back," you know, she shows me, "and her skin is clearing up," and all with just gut healing. I had another patient last week whose arthritis pain in her hands went away after treating a yeast infection that she just so happened to have. And we made that connection with yeast in the gut causing leaky gut and, you know, treating that. So it's something we see all the time.
Yeah, it is something that we see all the time. And I think that also people will come in with a neurological complaint, but we start with digestion. And a lot of people will say, why are we starting with my gut? I don't have any symptoms there. But in fact, that's the underpinning of it. So that's really very interesting. And so I'm going to have us turn to Dr. Rathod. If we can really, we've talked a lot about what happens with our intestinal barrier, what are some of the symptoms, and we've talked about how it can affect our whole body. And I'd really like to stress upon that mnemonic that you talked about, which is dig in again, and really see how does leaky gut really affect our immune system, and why is that important?
Sure. So if you can show me the mnemonic again. So now let's go to Digin, the slide on Digin.
There we go.
Right, there we go. So again, the aspects of this whole biological system that we call the gut is multifold. And it's summarized by this mnemonic called Digin. The first is digestion and absorption. So these are the things that you need, such as proper saliva, pH, proper stomach acid, enough digestive enzymes, enough bile and pancreatic enzymes. Then your villi that Dr. Scott was talking about, how they have their enzymes to do the final bits of breakdown of food. That's digestion and absorption. Intestinal permeability is what we call leaky gut. Understand that intestinal permeability is there to help us adapt to stress. If you're in a flight, you better open up your barriers. It's temporary. When you open up your barriers, nutrients can get in, fluids can get in, and you're ready for the chase. But the chase is meant to be very short-lived. The human chase is quite different. We live in a long-term stress state. And so if you're chronically stressed, then you're just that alone can open up intestinal permeability and lead to leaky gut. The gut microbiome is another huge factor. These are gut bacteria that control and regulate so many aspects of our function. Not only do we feed it the food, and I'm always talking to you about using root vegetables, etc., but when we feed them and they're happy, remember, modulate our immune system in a positive way. But if they're ticked off, then they start to create signaling to our immune system that says, all right, we need to get friends and foes together and start this battle, right? And so that's what happens with the gut microbiome. It's constantly modulating and modulating. We now know that the gut microbiome is what connects a lot of organs together, just like trees. I love trees and gardening, but the roots of trees connect with each other through fungi, through multiple fungi. So similarly, the gut microbiome is felt to be the glue in the body that connects everything together. And then the last part is the immune system, immune modulation. This is where I come in to say, how does leaky gut affect that? So to go to that slide on the immune system, Sita, that will now begin to show what we see in layers. Yeah, so you can see it in layers, but in reality, it's not quite such precise layers. So the top, the lumen part that she's showing you is where food is, bacteria is, toxins, you can see turmeric, microbiome, bile acids, dietary fibers, short-chain fatty acids are what the bacteria make that actually positively regulate the immune system. Then once food crosses, they're supposed to cross through the cell, not between the cell. If it's crossing between the cell, then there's a leaky gut. You can see various families of that billionaire family there. mucosal glial cells, the dendritic cells, T cells, B cells, macrophages, mast cells, they're all there, right? So they're constantly kind of putting out their feelers and feeling, is this a toxin? Is this an antigen? Nope, this is not a toxin, downregulate the immune system, etc. So they're right there constantly talking. Very often, if there's a lot of leakiness, these dendritic cells, that's the cell in the middle that looks like a heavy star, it actually puts its little star thing out into the lumen and begins to sample right away. So it's constantly saying, let's break things down and bring the forces in. So that's a very key cell that brings all cells in. The dendritic cell is also really important because as it goes towards the brain, it becomes the brain microglial cells, which is really the immune system of the brain, right? Sitting right next to that is the nervous system. So the immune system and the nervous system are also constantly talking to each other. And they regulate things like peristalsis. They control how the microbiome affect the nervous system as well, right? So they're all very tightly interconnected. When you're under stress, that nervous system is also acts in a hurried fashion, or in some people, it just literally slows them down. Why one happens over the other is not very well understood, but it's got to do with the play of neurotransmitters, your genetics, but very little is really genetics. It's really everything else. So the leaky gut definitely affects our immune system because it's constantly stimulating it. And when there's a barrier breach, there's going to be increased vigilance. And if there's increased vigilance, there's going to be war. So the immune system is always saying, is this a stranger in my midst that I can let go? Or is this a stranger with a danger signal, in which case I need to start war? And that's the way the immune system is thinking. And one last thing I'd like to close with is that, and Pashima mentioned it quite well, you can have local reaction in the gut that you're not even privy to. Okay? Something happening in your gut, but you think, I'm not constipated, I don't have heartburn, I don't have any gut symptoms, and yet that local effect there, which you're not privy to, can cause some systemic effects such as eczema of the skin or acne. So that's really important for you to understand how anywhere in the body, even one foot, a toe getting arthritic may have its roots in the gut. So that's why when you come to us and we go back to the gut, don't roll your eyes upwards. We're really trying to help you to say, hey, look, looking, I'm asking you several questions. I just need to know that you are doing everything that you need to for the gut. And if you're not, I'm going to do a little bit more anyway.
Thank you, Varsha. I think that that's very poised. And so I wanted to turn, and I know that some of these slides are a bit technical, but I really wanted to go back to this really simple slide of what is leaky gut. And really, this is really the foundation of what causes us to have a lot of these symptoms that we're talking about, is this intestinal barrier breaking down. And this is where we actually have a little bit of control, because we have control of what is causing some of this leaky gut to happen. So Scott, I know that we've spoken about some of these things here and there throughout the last few minutes, but if you can really dive into what are all the things, what's the scope of things that cause this leaky gut to happen and causes damage so that the intestine become a little bit more permeable.
Absolutely. And we have a slide to that effect also. But yeah, here we go. I think this is a good slide because it does cover the spectrum of many of the things that we talk about. And I think if you go across the top, these triggers that we look at, things that are triggering the microbiome or toxic to the cells themselves or break down that tight junction. We look at stress that we talked about earlier, and we are all in a high stress society, and even more so now with the COVID crisis. But we also live in an increasingly toxic environment where we have more pesticides and herbicides and things that are just being thrown and spewed into the air, things that we're bringing in, and those toxins can be profoundly have a profound impact on the health of the gut. One of the more common toxins that can affect the leaky gut syndrome is alcohol, and there's studies that just a couple of drinks of alcohol in a experimental basis has been shown to affect intestinal permeability for hours, just from a really very small one-time dose of alcohol. So alcohol falls into that toxin category in the upper part of this slide. Again, a huge part and a really foundational part of what we do at POM with approaching this is the food effect. We live in a Western society where food is full of sugars and processed foods and chemicals and high fructose corn syrup and so forth. And there's, again, more and more data coming out that these food groups and these food toxins, if you will, have again a very dramatic impact on the intestinal permeability, and also even overeating. Just excess calories becomes too much and can overpower, again, the integrity of this intestinal permeability or barrier. Pathogens are pretty obvious. We see everything from bacteria, where you get something like salmonella or one of the classic food poisonings, C. diff, but then it can be more subtle. There can be parasites. Yeast is a very common fungal type thing that we see a lot. As Bashima pointed out, can, again, by triggering this process, have wide-ranging systemic impacts. Again, unfortunately, in a Western society, that next category is very common, and that's in drugs. And particularly, I guess, we mentioned alcohol, but one of the more common, very toxic drugs or things that's commonly used over the counter and prescription are the anti-inflammatory, the NSAIDs, as we call them, the Motrin-like drugs. And again, very powerful drugs used in the right setting can be profoundly beneficial, but again, everything's in a trade-off. There's remarkable impact of these drugs on intestinal permeability. Drugs that we use to treat excess acid in the stomach, such as Prilosec, Nexium, steroids. Obviously, antibiotics are probably multi-layers of how they affect the gut. Then again, infections, which we mentioned. All of these tie into this cascade of kicking off changes in the microbiome, changes in the intestinal mucosal cells. There are pathogens that will wipe out all of those villi that we talked about, so you don't absorb. You get terrible diarrhea from things that attack those tight junctions, and as we move down through there, open up to allow food and bacterial products to enter into that immune layer, triggering, again, the immune complex things, triggering autoimmunity, systemic inflammation, and just a general deterioration of health. And I think it's an important part, that point that was made about our approach of, the gut, especially when we don't have a good idea of what to do for a patient. Often just starting with the gut is the first step. And as Dr. Williams pointed out, it's dramatic how often just that simple first step can be. And I think another important point on this slide is all the arrows are going down, but also the reverse can happen. If somebody has ongoing systemic inflammation from an autoimmune disorder or from an infection, that can have the reverse effect. That can go from the systemic side or inflammation and affect the gut going the reverse direction. So it's really a bidirectional system. We have more control on the triggers that we put into the GI tract. But I think this is, important to begin to look at these causes as we start to talk about how common leaky gut is and what can we do to really prevent this from happening or treat it if it's occurred.
Thanks, Scott. I think that was really helpful to have that overview now that we really are starting to understand what really leaky gut is, it really can be such a variety of things that can cause leaky gut, and how it's important to evaluate for leaky gut with whatever disorder, with whatever symptoms you're having, to see if that's what's contributing. And then we have control over a lot of these things, which is what's remarkable. So this is, a lot of times we feel that our health is out of our controls, but in fact, we do have control over a lot of these different triggers that we put inside our bodies or we're exposed to. So we really have a place. And I think that, over the course, we've been talking a little bit about the microbiome and how that's important for the health of our digestive system and what's inside the gut to help us decrease inflammation. So I'd like to really understand the microbiome. I'm sure we could spend an entire hour on the microbiome. It is kind of a vogue thing to talk about, but I'd like to spend a little bit of time, Bashima, if you could go into what is the microbiome, what are we talking about, and what is a healthy microbiome?
So the microbiome is all that, when we say microbiome, we're talking about all the genetic material that's inside of the microbes or bugs inside of our body. Most of the microbes, the bugs, exist in our small intestine and large intestine mostly. However, they do exist in other areas. In fact, a lot of times when we affect the microbiome, for example, in the gut, all of a sudden bladder microbiome changes and all of a sudden chronic UTIs go away, for example. So they are definitely systemic, and they're also definitely greatly associated in the gut. You do have 5 pounds of bugs in your body on average. The bacteria, fungi, parasites, and viruses are the types of bugs that you have that coexist peacefully when everything is going well. They can be potentially harmful when things are not going well. You can adversely affect your microbes with, for example, everything Scott just talked about, the diet, the drugs, things like that affect your microbes, which then therefore affect everything that the microbes do for you. So when we say a microbiome, it's a collective term of genetic material that exists in your body, primarily large intestine and small intestine. You're first exposed to microbes through the vaginal canal with delivery. You're also exposed to microbes through your mom's breast milk, which is why we always ask, were you born vaginally or C-section, or were you, and those are really, really important, because when you're born sterilely, the first set of microbes that you populate yourself with are extremely important. Other effects of microbes are primarily everything Scott just talked about. And that is one area that I love to talk about, because I love to empower my patients. It is in our control. We can't do everything. We can't live a perfect life, but it is in your power to some degree to change your own life, which is really awesome. Effects of microbes, Dr. Rateau talked a lot about that. Digestion, absorption of nutrients, even B12 levels are greatly associated with what type of microbiomes you have, what type of bacteria you have in your gut, because they are actually it's one of the byproducts. Bacteria make the B12. B12 deficiency is greatly affected by your microbiome, if you will. Short-chain fatty acid production, which Dr. Rateau also mentioned, that helps the gut lining greatly. And short-chain fatty acid production, if you have healthy gut bacteria, you will have good, healthy gut lining. Your immune modulation, T-cell regulation, things like that are all affected by the type of bacteria and other organisms that are coexisting peacefully in your gut. So we strive for that.
Thanks, Bashima. I think it is quite remarkable that we have an entire set of species living inside us, and that that is truly fundamentally what the microbiome is, and how that really affects us on a whole is something that is probably we're going to be researching for a long time yet. So I'd like to turn now. The burning question that I always get is, I've heard about leaky gut. I want to get tested for it. Do you think I have it? How common is it? Scott, can you help us understand really, what do you think are the prevalence of leaky gut is in the community, in healthy, non-healthy individuals? And would you test yourself, and how do you go about getting tested?
Yeah. So I think if you think back to that cartoon that had all of those causes across the top, and you think about modern society, I can't say an exact number, but I would say it's very common because of all of those causes and issues that lead to leaky gut. And I would say at POM, in terms of people who come to us for medical concerns, it's very high, more than 50%, and probably to some extent every patient. In terms of testing, there are tests. There's some blood tests, stool tests. There's some tests that we can look at and we can quantify and identify and really support the argument that this is leaky gut, perhaps follow it. But often, as we've been kind of talking through this, it often is a clinical determinant based on just the history and really things that people have been through. Like Dr. Williams just pointed out, were you born by C-section, not breastfed, and you had ear infections and you got the first 6 months of life was nothing but antibiotics? That's someone who we can feel pretty comfortable, if they're having problems in adulthood, there's some element of an altered microbiome, some element of a leaky gut. So sometimes, often, we don't even need to do those tests. We assume it's part of the treatment plan, but we have indirect and direct markers that we can use and do often to help confirm that we're correct in labeling somebody as having leaky gut. But again, I think it's a remarkably common problem due to all of those variables that we just talked about.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I think that I wonder how prevalent it is truly, and whether we kind of come in and out of having leaky gut over the course of our life and over the course of the month or the year. So I think it's something that we should be thinking about, without testing or with testing, in both ways. So Varsha, I commonly send patients to you. They have migraines and we test them. They have, and it's a neurological disorder. They end up having leaky gut. How do you approach patients when you do diagnose or you're suspicious of leaky gut? Where do you start with them?
The simplest, I would say, I would use it 90% of the time, is a program that functional medicine has formulated called the 5 R's. The 5 R's stand for remove. I don't know if we have a slide on that. It is to remove and rotate. So I wish the rotate was also bolded. It should be remove and rotate, because sometimes if you have 80 of 90 foods through, I cannot remove all those foods, but I can sure teach you how to rotate those foods and not trigger the immune system all the time. So think of the 5R program as being very intuitive, and it parallels Digin, right? So Digin is just a mnemonic which says these are all the functions of the digestive system. So by removing and rotating, we're actually removing toxins, we're removing allergens, we're removing non-food that trigger the immune system, right? Then we're going to replace things, and this is the D part of it. So do you need stomach acid? Do you need bile salts? Do you need digestive enzymes? Whatever we need to replace, we will put it back. If someone has severe lactose intolerance, they need lactate, or they might use Beano because they can barely tolerate beans, right? So those are the replace functions. In re-inoculating, that's the role of the gut microbiome. So can we really re-inoculate our gut bacteria? No, what you keep in the first 2 years of your life, you pretty much keep. Now, you can cull them down, they may go defunct or dormant on you, but they are the same bacteria that you've inherited and maintained for the first 2 to 5 years of your life. So those 5 years of your life are extremely important to eat well. In re-inoculating, if you put probiotics in there, we are trained to help you pick out your probiotics. If you put probiotics in there, it works to signal the immune system. And it's definitely proven to be beneficial in many ways, whether you use prebiotic, which is the food for the probiotic, and I call those root vegetables and high fiber foods. It could be probiotic, which is the actual bacteria, or it could be symbiotics, a combination of both of them. The repair function will start right up front, because if you have a leak, just remove the food, then the new food that comes in can leak through, right? Whatever you eat commonly is going to leak through. So as soon as you start to remove and start the process of rotating other foods which you're not sensitive to, we start the repair process. And we use multiple agents for repair. The most commonly used agents would be zinc carnosine, L-glutamine, and then often if there are multiple foods leaking through, we might use something called serum immunoglobulin as well. The balance goes to that part of Digin, which is the nervous system, right? I mean, our mind and the nervous system, I'm connecting them together. The moment we're put on something like the elimination diet or a certain kind of a diet, the first thing that hits us is, oh my God, I'm being punished, right? And so automatically we have this thought that food is almost a toxin, as opposed to we're supposed to relax into it and just understand that what we're doing is looking at food as an information molecule and seeing what is that information doing to us. For example, if I started eating and every time I ate, I got just a little twang of pain. Do I ignore that twang of pain, or do I say, you know, it's happening frequently enough, I better go back and do the elimination diet? And that's the way I do it for myself and teach patients to do. So that's the 5R program in short, but you will find that we physicians will add to it. So we might say, okay, someone might have just garden variety dysbiosis where we just need to give you a probiotic. Someone else might have yeast overgrowth, like Dr. Williams mentioned with one of her patients who had joint pains, and treat the yeast and the joint pain goes away. Someone else might have SIBO, and someone else, especially the ones that have lots of foods leaking through, you know, they have more things than just SIBO, and they usually have something called mast cell activation syndrome, and we might treat that. Or it could be a combination and permutation of all of these.
And Varsha, one of the common questions that I get is, oh my gosh, I have to take eggs and dairy out of my diet. Do I have to do that permanently? So when you do start removing these things, are these permanent removing from their diet, or are they able to get back to being able to have those foods in the future?
No, it is very temporary. It's very transient. When I first started with functional medicine, I would often put people in a 3 to 6 month program. No longer do I do that. Now it's about a month or so that's really strict. And then after that, it's really the art of rotation of the foods. And nature creates that rotation for us, right? So this is spring, and asparagus and strawberries and blueberries are in. So eat those foods and give up the squashes right now because that was your winter food. Then as summer comes in, the pitted fruits come in, watermelon and very high water foods, because it keeps us hydrated during the summer, hot summer months. In the winter months, you get warming foods that keep you warm, root vegetables, lots of green vegetables. So learn to eat seasonally. Of course, we have lots of foods that are non-seasonal, right? So nuts and seeds available year-round, legumes year-round, chicken, turkey year-round. So that we have to learn the art of rotating. And I'm sure some of you growing up, at least I remember, I had 2 grandmas, and I knew which grandma's house to go to who had this particular food on a Monday, and the other grandma would have the food that I didn't like, so I wouldn't go to her home, you know. So they knew the art of rotation of foods, not only seasonally, but also what was not seasonal, you learn to rotate it.
Great. And so I think that once we've treated it, these individuals start to feel so healthy, their symptoms go away. And one of the things that I notice and what we get called about a lot, and when I'm on call on the weekends, I'll get individuals who've been treated by you or Dr. Jamison or Dr. Williams, and they say, hey, I just got treated for leaky gut. I'm feeling great. I just went to the urgent care center and I have to start antibiotics for pneumonia. So Bashima, when you have a patient that you've just treated with leaky gut and they have to start antibiotics, how do you keep them healthy? How do you keep them from not developing leaky gut again, especially if they're infected and now you're going to wipe out their microbiome potentially with starting antibiotics? What do you do?
So we see this a lot. Of course, with our own patients, we individualize care because every single person is different. If you have had severe leaky gut and you're still being treated, going on antibiotics could definitely hamper that, and we're going to be more aggressive. If you're feeling great and it's been a couple of years and you haven't really, and you've continued eating really healthy and you already have a healthy diet and you have a pretty decent barrier, we'll do less. But for sure, for everyone, this is where diet is really important, because what you're feeding your gut microbes, what you're feeding your gut bacteria and bugs is super important, because if you're feeding them healthy food and you're avoiding the fast foods and the junk foods and the high sugar foods and even dairy, the gut microbes will certainly be healthier, and that's the goal. The other thing we do is make sure you're hydrating yourself well. You're drinking a lot of water, you're having daily bowel movements, things like that. We also, in a lot of cases, add probiotics. I like to add probiotics that are a mixture of certain bacteria. And depending on your case and history, we'll make certain recommendations. Like, for example, orthobiotics is a great probiotic to take when you have antibiotics on board. You do want to take them in the evening. You do want to take them on an empty stomach, and you want it to be at least 2 hours after you've taken your last dose of antibiotics for the day. We also sometimes, depending on the situation, I'll add things like L-glutamine that Dr. Rattod was talking about, to help the gut barrier, especially in my severe leaky gut patients, because I want to be on top of it and I want to be proactive. I don't want to be reactive. I also include a lot of times a little zinc. I'll also recommend things like marshmallow root tea, things like that will just really help. The other thing I sometimes add, not always, is digestive enzymes with meals while they're on antibiotics, just to make digestion of complex food products easier, and therefore nutrient absorption and things like that easier in the body.
Great. Yeah, and I think that's an important point. It's, we're going to have to be on antibiotics here and there. We might have pneumonia. We might have nasty ear infection that needs to be treated with antibiotics, but we can do something. We have control over how we can keep our gut healthy during that time. And I think that's the thing that we've really tried to stress in our practice. And those prebiotics, those postbiotics, all being a combination of things that are very helpful for us. So what I'd like to do is kind of talk about the healthy person. And Scott, I'm going to turn this question to you. And I want to give you a little bit of a frame of reference. You have a 40-year-old man who's an athlete. He is married with one child who's around 1 or 2 years old. And he is, doesn't have many medical problems. He's had an injury here or there. He has a family history of some heart disease and some dementia. He just wants to stay healthy. And he just wants to come to you and say, what do I do to just stay healthy and keep my gut from not turning into leaky gut? Or maybe I do have leaky gut. What would you suggest in that person who's healthy?
I think, and that's a common scenario. I think the first part is, as all of us talked about, is that diet is the absolute foundation that we have to work with. Avoiding the negative impact of high sugar, processed food, non-organic food, but then the positive of the good foods, the root vegetables, the things that supply high fiber that really help keep us keep our gut microbiome healthy and functioning well. So I think that diet is always that most critical component when we're not actively treating somebody with leaky gut or may have mild leaky gut without other clinical ramifications. Along that line, again, I think if we go back and think about those things we talked about as causes, making sure that alcohol consumption is not excessive or not every day, even, where the gut has a chance to heal up. Stress management, having a little kid at the house and, so forth can be stress. So exercise becomes very critical. Things such as making sure you're getting good sleep, really recharging, keeping the immune system, the adrenal function in good overall balance is going to further keep and maintain a healthy gut. Again, being aware of, you have to take an antibiotic for this, or you hurt your knee and you have to take 5 days of Motrin to get over that. Just being aware of the fact that while you may not have clinical presentation or symptoms from that, you probably have done a little bit of something negative to your gut microbiome, to your gut function. And by being aware of that, when you have to take those antibiotics, you have to take Motrin, doing the things that Dr. Williams mentioned, such as being more proactive with probiotics or being a little more careful with rotating things out like gluten, rotating out dairy, for that recovery time, if you will. Those can be very proactive things. I think fermented foods can be a very functional source of good, natural, both prebiotic and probiotic support for the gut to keep it healthy. So I think awareness, that's the exciting thing about this presentation, is being aware of of what the gut does in good function and in bad function, and being aware of some of those things that you do have control over. And if you have a trip that you have to eat poorly for a week or different than you normally would, well, then you need to go through a period where we're eating healthier. There's actually data that intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding, they have real benefit in terms of recharging the gut microbiome, reducing inflammation in the GI tract. So I think awareness is the really first critical component to maintaining and staying on top of those influences to keep it from becoming a clinically significant leaky gut.
Thanks. I think that that's really the foundation of, of kind of almost every approach. So I think that's really helpful to see that framework of how do you approach somebody who's really healthy and how do you look at that digestion system. So, and I think that we would be remiss to not speak about COVID today. So even though we are trying to transition to how do we look at functional medicine? How do we look at health in that framework? And so I'd like to have Varsha kind of close us in the last 5 minutes on, how should we look at leaky gut as it pertains to COVID? And I know that you wanted us to share this slide, so I'm going to go ahead and get that slide for you going. Varsha, do you mind just kicking us off with that?
Yeah, sure. So if you remember the causes of leaky gut, infection was one of those causes of leaky gut. So look at the top left corner. Poor dietary choices because we're under stress, number 2, and there's an infection, COVID-3, so COVID-19. So those are the 3 that are really huge during COVID time, right? So both for prophylaxis, that means prevention, and also if you happen to get the infection. So the infection, we know that the same receptor called the ACE2 receptor through which it gets into your lungs and nasopharyngeal cavity is also present in these enterocytes, that single cell barrier that Dr. Jameson was showing you. So we have ACE2 receptors there. So when the virion gets into that ACE2 receptor, it can cause GI symptoms. It's more common to get it in the upper respiratory tract, but you can have GI symptoms. The interesting thing is that these ACE2 receptors in the gut communicate with the lung receptors. So if you have, say, lung problems, then the microbiome of the lung actually cross signal, or there's a bidirectional communication from the lung to the ACE receptors and the gut microbiome in the gut. So this is how COVID in your lung can affect your gut, and COVID in your gut can affect your lung or other tissues in your body. Just recently, published May 13th, in Virus Research, they noted something that I thought was quite incredible, because that's what we do here at POM Health. So I'm just simply going to read it out to you. And again, it says, and they asked the question, why are elderly people and immune compromised people getting COVID more easily? And they pointed out that it's really related to the gut microbiome in these individuals that has gone crazy and gone wrong, right? Either because of poor food. So they said improving gut microbiota profile by personalized nutrition and supplementation known to improve immunity, we talk about that, can be one of the prophylactic ways by which to impact this disease. The impact of this disease can be minimized in old and immune compromised people. Isn't that fantastic? Isn't that what we're doing? That's what we've been talking about in these previous webinars. So remember that we started with death or life begins in the colon, right? So what we do with our lifestyle really can affect and build resilience in our system even now, because COVID-19 is not going to be quickly gone. It might slowly fizzle away and taper away, but you're going to have cases come in and you're going to want to be vigilant. So while being vigilant, if you also maintained your lifestyle, meaning got 7 to 8 hours of sleep, got enough movement going, because movement helps with peristalsis, your nervous system and your mind. If you are able to eat healthy and work towards a largely plant-based diet, you will do really well, and put in those root vegetables. We can't have that much social communication, but to me, this Zoom for right now is social communication. So this actually works out quite well with all of us in different rooms, not wearing masks. It's better to do this than do this, right? So all of this will change our microbiome and bring those early microbiota microbes that you had in your gut back by the right food that you give it. So not only does food feed your microbiota, but it also then begins to change who we are, because it makes vitamins, destroys toxins, helps repair our leaky barrier, modulates our immune system in a positive way. So I hope you got this from this lecture, and that we try to keep it as simple as possible. But you are always in control, and you have to know that. Your gene causes a very small portion of your problem. It's the environment that we're in, our lifestyle, which creates an environment, is what causes our problems.
Thanks, Varsha. I think that is a nice summary. And I think that we had talked a little bit at the very beginning that, all diseases begin in the gut, and the death, or as we like to say, life begins in the colon. And I think what, our motto is health begins in our gut, and how can we focus on our gut? And that's why we really wanted to focus today on our digestive system as it relates to the immune system. And I really do want you guys to know that this is the beginning of a set of webinars that we will be doing. The next one we want to tackle is detoxification. We really want to do that next, because as we've been kind of in this 3-month phase of COVID hitting us, there's some of us have turned to unhealthy lifestyles, some of us have turned to healthier lifestyles, but we're all exposing ourselves to a myriad of different toxins and things that we can help. We can kind of use this as a mechanism in this time in the summer to reboot our lives and reboot our health. And I think detoxification is a nice way to do that. And so the next seminar that we'll be doing in about 2 to 3 weeks will be focused on detoxification. So I hope you stay tuned. And then the last thing I'd like to say is that if you were unable to see the whole webinar, or would like others to share this webinar, we will be posting this webinar recording on social media, as well as emailing it to members later this week or early next week once we get everything edited. So I really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you, Varsha, Scott, and Bashima, for all your efforts over these last 3 months, and also in preparing for today and talking about leaky gut. And I thank everyone for coming and joining us. We've really enjoyed this time to reach out to you in the middle of COVID and help socialize in a different way. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.